Hello America, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'd like to discuss President Trump's recent veto of the resolution to block the national emergency that was passed recently by Congress. So if you guys have been following some of my previous videos, I've kind of been sort of following this. We've had several videos discussing the progress of the resolution. The resolution started in the U.S. House of Representatives, and basically what the resolution said was that it basically blocked the declaration of the national emergency that was done by President Trump in an effort basically to get the funding for the construction of the border wall along the United States southern border. This was done after President Trump and Congress could not come to, any type of meaningful agreement during the government shutdown that occurred, where both sides were trying to negotiate some form of funding to be provided for construction of the border wall. In the end, President Trump wanted somewhere around $5 billion. And Congress was willing to give between $1 and $2 billion. So that fell far short of President Trump's, requests for the funding. Now, during the shutdown and during the, negotiations and everything, President Trump was asked, will you use your powers to declare a national emergency? And he said that, he probably would, and he did follow through on that. And likewise, he had said all along that if Congress passed a resolution to block his, national emergency, he would veto the resolution. So this action by President Trump was very much expected. But on Friday, March 15th, he went ahead and actually signed the veto, the official veto, to block the resolution, basically to declare that there is no national emergency, or that the situation, not that there is no national emergency. I think both sides during the, again, all the back and forth during the government shutdown had agreed that there is certainly a situation at the southern border. It requires work, it requires attention. It's certainly an issue that needs to be discussed. The questioning was just, in terms of the funding. That really was the issue. President Trump was looking for, like I said, around $5 billion, at least $5 billion for construction of the wall, whereas, in Congress there was discussions about, what constitutes a wall. When you say wall, do you mean a physical wall? Do you mean electronic surveillance? I mean, what are you looking for? And also just the amounts of funding, because the real issue is that funding has to come from somewhere. The money just doesn't grow out of thin air, so the money is going to come from somewhere. Now, some of the reports have said that a lot of the funding will come from cuts at Homeland Security. So again, if you're trying to bolster our borders, but you're going to cut Homeland Security, and also the Department of Defense with military cuts and defense spending cuts, are you putting the nation at risk? So, these are the sort of things that have gone back and forth. But as I mentioned previously, President Trump was expected to veto the resolution, and he did so. Now, this is actually the first veto of President Trump's presidency, so he has not used the veto power before, although, again, like I mentioned, he had said that he would veto the resolution. And, when he vetoed the resolution, he basically said that he felt that the declaration of the resolution to block the national emergency, he felt that action by Congress was reckless and dangerous. So that was his feeling, and sort of his way of justifying issuing the veto. And he has said all along, he has certainly been steadfast in his declarations that he does feel that the situation at the U.S. southern border constitutes a quote-unquote serious threat to American safety, and that basically is the definition of an emergency. A national emergency would be one which constitutes a serious threat or concern to American safety and well-being. So that's how he's saying that there is a national emergency. He also has said that the resolution to block, the funding basically puts countless Americans in danger. Now, again, this has been really a hot point of contention back and forth between President Trump and his, other members of Congress. He has said that, the situation at the border allows drugs to come in. It allows, illegal immigrants to come in, undocumented workers. It also puts people, citizens at risk from violent crimes committed by undocumented workers. And certainly, of course, there have been instances where, people who are here illegally have committed crimes. They have committed murders. They have, been involved with illegal trafficking of drugs. So, it's not that this is untrue, but, opponents of the emergency basically state that most violent crimes are committed by people who are born in this country and are citizens. That's just what the statistics show. The statistics also show that most illegal drugs come in through ports of entry. They aren't snuck across the border. So again, if you're trying to fact check it, and you're trying to have the greatest impact on stopping these things, that's really the question, is the construction. And the question really all along that people have been, debating for the last several years, is the construction of a physical border wall going to actually improve these things? Recently, President Trump touted, the city of El Paso as a prime example of, a city where, construction of a physical border impacted positively their crime rate, their murder rate, their rate of violent crimes. Unfortunately, again, the people in El Paso, the mayor of El Paso actually came out and said that President Trump was wrong. Violent crime actually increased after construction of the border wall, and that, any drops in crime had absolutely nothing to do with construction of a physical barrier between El Paso and Mexico. So, that's really where a lot of this sort of stems, is that, okay, we'll build a border wall, but what is the border wall going to accomplish? A lot of people have said it's going to basically accomplish what President Trump said in his campaigning during the 2016 presidential election all along, that he would build a border wall. He vowed to build a border wall. Now, he did say that he would get Mexico to pay for it, and obviously, declaring a national emergency and, taking billions of dollars from the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense, is not having Mexico pay for it. So, that sort of has gone by the wayside. But, this is what President Trump wants to do, and he's sort of sticking to his guns here with this veto. Now, when President Trump signed the veto, he basically said, Congress has the freedom to pass this resolution, which again blocks the national emergency, and I have the duty to veto it. And when he signed it, he had members of the U.S. Border Patrol with him. He had the U.S. Attorney General, William Barr, with him. He also had some of the families of people who have been victims or have lost loved ones to violent crimes committed by people who are in this country illegally. So, there is support. And, you know, President Trump, like I said, he has felt all along that, you know, the situation at the U.S. southern border does constitute a quote-unquote national emergency, and therefore he has the power to declare an emergency and go around Congress, basically, and take the money that he wants to build the wall. Now, the veto comes after 12 Republican senators joined with Democrats in passing the resolution in the Senate. The resolution had already passed the U.S. House of Representatives, where it then went to the Senate. It needed 4 Republicans to join with all the Democrats in order for it to pass. And in the end, when the vote came, 12 Republicans voted for the resolution to block the national emergency, as did all of the Democrats. So the resolution passed, and at that point, it went to the president for him to either sign or to veto, and he chose to veto, which he had said all along he would do. And again, the resolution was to basically block the declaration of the national emergency, and really to block the president basically going around Congress, bypassing Congress, and taking the funds that they refused to give him during the back and forth during the U.S. government shutdown. And that's really one of the main things that, you know, when you speak with, or some of the statements that have been made by the 12, you know, Republican senators, because again, there was pressure on them from their party, from the president, to, you know, stick to the party line and support the president. But basically what they came out and said is that the emergency declaration effectively goes around Congress to get funding for the border wall, which Congress had already said no to. So the questions are, does this violate the separation of powers? Again, we have the House of Representatives, we have the Senate, and we have the President. So it's 3 separate branches which are supposed to work together and serve as checks and balances. So what the President effectively did was go around Congress and just take the money that Congress refused to give them. Another, you know, point that a lot of the Republicans have really said, you know, and really said that President Trump isn't really thinking about, is that this same tactic of going around Congress by declaring an emergency could be used by future presidents, future Democratic presidents, to push their agendas through against the wishes of, you know, Congress, whether it's held by Senate Democrats or Republicans. So they felt that it really set a bad precedent for the future, because, you know, if President Trump does this, what's to prevent, you know, a future president who could be a Democrat from going around Congress again and pushing through their agendas? So that's what a lot of the senators, Republican senators, and some of the Democratic senators also have said that this is also a bad precedent. You can't just go around and bypass Congress at will. But this is what they've said, is that this is setting up the future where any president can basically go right around Congress, doesn't need Congress anymore. So what else can they do by using these powers to declare a national emergency, which are supposed to be used, you know, only in the most desperate of times? So the question is, of course, now President Trump has vetoed the resolution. What will happen next? Well, what the veto does is basically it effectively will send the resolution back to where it originated, in the House of Representatives. Now, what needs to happen for the resolution to survive the presidential veto is that 2/3 of the U.S. House of Representatives would have to support overriding the presidential veto. So 2/3 of the entire House would have to say, yes, we feel that we are going to stand up. We don't agree with the president. We're not going to support his veto, and we are going to push for the resolution to survive the veto and go through. The House is not expected to have enough support to override the veto. So the House is not, at least at this time, expected to have the 2/3 necessary to actually support overriding the presidential veto, at least not from, the initial vote that took place to pass the resolution. So, now it will be debated. I mean, again, it will go back to the House and it won't just go right for a vote. There'll definitely be, a debate. But, barring a lot more Republican members of the House, voting to, block the veto, the House is not expected to have enough support to override the veto. So then the question will become, what will happen then? Well, officially, if the House is not able to gain the 2/3 support to override the presidential veto, the veto will basically block the resolution. So then the question will be, what will happen next? A lot of people had said basically now it's going to go to the courts. Now, the Department of Justice has said that the president was within his right of using the national emergency powers to declare an emergency, but it still could go into the courts for quite some time. Who knows how long, and could be dragged along. And again, President Trump had actually said, when the resolution first came out, what do you think will happen? And he said, well, I think it's going to be a long, drawn-out thing where it's going to go to the Senate, and it might pass, and then it'll come to me, and then I'll veto it, then I'll send it back to the House, and the House probably won't be able to pass it, but then it'll go to the courts, and it'll go back and forth, and we might get a decision, we might not. If we don't get the decision we want, we'll appeal it. So it looks like this issue is far from having any, permanent resolution. Interestingly, a lot of the senators had kind of, before, passing and agreeing with the resolution, had kind of said, well, why don't we take the initiative, and why doesn't the president, try to come up with some type of compromise to keep this situation from just basically dragging on for years? Let's come up with sort of that same back and forth that we had during the government shutdown. We were very far apart during the shutdown. Again, the president wanted, I think, over $5 billion for the wall, and Congress was willing to give a little bit over $1 billion. So they were far apart, but a lot of the senators said, that back and forth was very, very useful. And, if we could just continue with that, and again, the way the government is supposed to work is that it's supposed to be a system of back and forth, checks and balances, and compromises, where you come to, a mutual agreement that everyone can live with and that still benefits the country. So, because again, just remember that whether you support the wall or you don't, whatever money President Trump is going to use has to come from somewhere. It has to come from basically, it's a zero-sum sort of system. So in other words, that money just, isn't just laying around in some vault somewhere. That money is earmarked for other purposes. So again, right now, it's estimated that a large chunk of the money to build the wall, if the veto stands and, President Trump were actually able to appropriate the funds, would come for cuts at the Department of Homeland Security. So you're talking about cuts at the, all of the other programs that are designed to, strengthen our Homeland Security, transportation safety, all the security at the airports. So, and also from cuts at the Department of Defense, defense spending as well. So, people have said, it doesn't make sense. We're trying to strengthen one border, but we're willing to sort of, do that by cutting some of our other defenses? So is that really helping national security? Is it keeping Americans safe? And that's really the question. Whether, again, you support the wall or you don't support the wall, it's how are we going to pay for the wall? Because all along people have said it sounds like a great idea, you're going to build this big wall, but where's that money going to come from? And, that's really the question that I think this all really needs to come back around. Because, again, when you go back to that back and forth, which was very telling during the government shutdown, both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, said, absolutely, we have issues, we have a situation at the U.S. southern border. No one disputed that. No one said that the southern border is fine, no issues, no problems with illegal immigrants coming into the country. We don't need to do a thing. No one said that. But what everyone said is, let's come up with a compromise, a situation where, yes, we improve our southern border, but at the same time, we don't decimate other programs like, Defense Department spending and the Department of Homeland Security. So let's strengthen our borders, but let's also keep our Department of Defense strong, and also, keep our Homeland Security Department strong as well. So that's what really needs to be remembered, I think, is that, no matter how much money eventually goes towards the construction of the wall, unless President Trump is successful in getting Mexico to pay for it, and that certainly doesn't look likely, as there's not really been too much, really made of those claims, unless he somehow thinks that, putting tariffs and, taxes on things that are imported from Mexico is going to raise enough money from that to build the wall, which it won't. America has to pay for it. Americans have to pay for this. This is our tax dollars which go towards these various programs. So that's what really needs to be kept in mind. And we'll just have to see how this plays out. Unfortunately, I think it has a long, long way to go because, like I said, I think that if it can't survive in the House of Representatives, the resolution, it's going to wind up in the courts. And that could be a very, very long process. So, we'll really have to just sort of see. And I'd love to know what you guys think. Let me know down below. Please comment on the video. We really love your comments. We really appreciate them. So, and if you like these kind of videos, please be sure to like this video, comment down below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Okay? Thanks so much, guys. I'll see you in the next video.